Greetings, programs, and welcome to a very special episode of the Awesome Friday podcast. My name is. Yeah, we came from Boston. We up on Sumner Street where we're doing the podcast. Anyway, my name is Matthew, and with me, as always, is Simon. How are you today, Simon?
Hey, how's it going? I'm good. How are you doing? Great to have you with us.
What accent is that?
That's
just That's just gravelly. That's just like
that's
a frog in your throat.
That's my George Lucas once like a bar owner in a Star Wars prequel that is like kind of a gangster badass, but it is good-hearted, and it's probably a giant frog or something. It's kind of Dexter related.
It just sounds like you have a sore throat, man. It just sounds like you have a sore throat.
That's how everyone talks. Actually, it's verging it really into the terrible Jewish stereotype guy, Watto. What do you want? I do love,
from the first one.
I do love that film. Newbie man. Wow, I can do a good one. Maybe I should do a professional Watto impressions. I'm fine.
I mean, I don't know, man. Like, I feel like maybe doing impressions of the horrible Jewish stereotype is not a great career path.
Come on, it's not a Jewish stereotype. It's not as if it was a diminutive of a character with certain facial features who was really obsessed with gambling and money. That's not. That's not.
I'm sure that the Trade Federation also, just because they had eyes with slits in the middle and spoke in a stilted accent and were obsessed with the flow of commerce, I'm sure that wasn't a stereotype of any kind either.
Come on. You're reading far too much into this.
What I find actually as a fascinating thing about Star Wars is that, like, I think we all basically recognized in 1999 that was terrible, right? Like, even in 24 years ago, even we were all
on the nose, yes.
Like, at that point, I think even the worst of us were like, this is probably bad, right? Like, this is probably bad. Like 24 years ago, we were not as culturally enlightened as we are today. And that's why, I think it's fine to engage with problematic material as long as you understand the context and the reasons why it's problematic and you're able to sort of like move past it.
Look, dude, are you speaking to the person who had to put up with the Empire or having clipped British accents? The Empire that likes to go planet to planet and take everything and spread the culture aggressively.
Yeah, but that's just accurate though. So I guess what I'm saying is that we're far more culturally enlightened today than we were, but at the same time, like, even in 1999, I feel like most of us must have been like, this is probably bad, right? Like, this is probably, like, is this okay? Is this okay? Like, my teacher in high school told me I shouldn't do that Asian accent anymore. Is this okay? Anyway, but yeah, things are good. We're watching stuff. And on this note, we're talking about Star Wars today. That's why this is a very special episode of the Awesome Friday podcast. And by very special, I of course do not mean late. I mean exactly on time.
Well, I mean that too. But yeah. We're physically publishing this as quickly as we can after the embargo for the thing we're talking about today, which means you're not going to get this on Sunday as usual. You're going to get it. This is Tuesday or is this Wednesday? What day is this?
So the review embargo for the show we're about to talk about, which for the record is Star Wars Ahsoka. The review embargo is 9 a.m. Pacific time on the 22nd, which is Wednesday, which is also the day the show comes out, which is usually not a great sign when the embargo is so late. However, in this particular case, I mean, Disney does this for everything now. It is what it is. It's fine. I think they understand they don't really need, critics and buzz building for something like Star Wars, which is fine. But spoiler alert, usually they do that on stuff that's bad, and this is not that. Yeah. So I'm very excited to talk about it.
I also don't understand the split embargo dates where you have a social media reactions date of like the 17th and then a review coverage of the 23rd or whatever. And surely a review is a stated opinion about something, and a social media reaction, is it meant to be literally, I have seen Ahsoka. like without any opinion? Because if you give an opinion in your social media, then that's a review. No.
So, I mean, this. I don't know if our listeners are interested in this, but for me, the difference is that the social media reaction is everything you can fit into a tweet, right? So,
But it's
or
still a review.
maybe a couple of tweets. So, our social media reaction is like, so I had the chance to see Ahsoka and I liked it, and I think it's neat, and I can't wait to see what comes next. And a review, the review embargo is like, I've seen Ahsoka. Here is why I liked it. Here are some more specific notes on these characters or these performances or the overreaching plots, that kind of thing. So like
Mm-hmm.
the difference is in detail, effectively. But
Right.
yeah, so there, I think that
Interesting.
like from a business perspective,
Mm-hmm.
the split embargoes make sense because it's much easier to build buzz off 1,000 people saying I've seen it and I liked it than it is off maybe people being like here's my nuanced take on the
Mm-hmm.
representation of the Grey Jedi in this upcoming Star Wars project that is set between like one
Mm-hmm.
of those things is easier to market than the other is all I'm trying to say.
Yes.
So
Interesting. Well, today is nuance then, is it? Is that what we're going to bring to the table?
I mean, as much as is possible on the internet. And before we get started, because it is a good show, but before we get started, I'd just like to point out that so we're talking today. This show's going to be out on the 22nd, and as of the time we're recording this, the ongoing WGA and SAG-AFTRA strikes are still happening. The AMPTP has not come back to the table for SAG-AFTRA, although there is apparently a proposal for WGA at this point, I believe, to end their strikes. And I we would like to just point out that none of this is possible without the writers, without the performers, without everyone who makes these shows, who clearly loves these shows, these universes, these characters. And it is not possible to do these with AI, and it is not. It's not possible to do these without the love that these people bring to the material. And we stand in solidarity with the WGA and the SAG-AFTRA, and we hope they get a fair deal soon. But if they don't, I hope they stay on strike as long as they need to get that fair deal. Because none of the
Mm-hmm.
stuff that you watch would be possible without the people who make it. No matter what Disney tells you, no matter what any studio tells you.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, yeah, that's pretty much that. Anything you want to add to that, Simon?
We talk about this a lot, and I think we should talk about this a lot. We've mentioned this at every podcast, and we've talked a lot in the past about the wider societal take on artistic creation these days. And I think there are multiple things coming to a head here. But I think that the advancement of AI in the creation of data that can be interpreted as a script is has really exacerbated all these things that have been happening for years and years. Even when I was in the industry, like 12, 14 years ago, when I was doing it professionally, this was coming to a head. And I think the line has been drawn now. And the most upsetting thing to me is that they don't seem to want to try and find a solution. They just want to sit it out and let people lose their houses, let people go hungry. I've got two very close friends in Vancouver or the area, Greater Vancouver, who are currently on major damage control because their spouses work in the Canadian industry. Now, one's an actor, one's a set designer, and the Canadian unions are not allowed to go on strike in support of SAG-AFTRA, so they're not on strike. But because Vancouver is such a huge filming industry for American film productions, nothing's coming up here, and so they're both on like absolute money lockdown until they try and sit this out. So it's affecting so many people, and it's so cynical, and it's such a horrible confirmation of what I've been feeling for a long, long time, is that these huge companies that used to be fine with paying residuals and used to understand that you pay for good writing and you pay for good acting, and then you keep paying when you show something and make money from it. The creators get a slice of that. They used to just be fine until the streaming industries decided that they wanted to make more money, so to pay pay fewer or zero residuals, and now they're all openly hiring AI engineers, and as business people, that if they can remove the human element from content, capital C, content creation, then that's the perfect scenario for them, because they never have to pay another human again. And it's just a horrible confirmation of what I've been feeling for a while, and that art is dead. The society we live in does not value art as any kind of thing because it's not directly profitable. You have to, it's a business that happens to create other people's creative output, and if they can reduce the money they pay for that, then they're clearly all going, and they're not even the latest proposed contract from SAG-AFTRA, which was rejected outright, was just basic things like pay background better. I don't even want to get into the way background are treated on set. There's a reason background don't have their own like sub union, because they would never work. They would be on strike constantly because they're treated so badly and paid so badly. So SAG-AFTRA tried to put in something about background, tried to put in something about being paid for extra overtime or this, that, and the other. It's all just got flatly rejected.
Just
All
being
being
given
rejected.
one of
Just
the
basic stuff.
one of the proposals was to better monitor and penalize the studios when the performers aren't given sufficient meal breaks, and it was flatly rejected. Which is just like, why? Like, it's just
because all of this is. I think that they can just ride this wave. These big companies are just going to dip into their reserves and just ride the wave, and wait for the creators to break, because they don't value creativity, because it is not money. It's not an Excel spreadsheet,
Well, I
and
think
you
the other
see
thing
this.
is, for me, I think the other thing is that the one thing that's majorly different today in 2023 than it was, and I'm just going to stick to the Writers Guild strikes. So the last one was 2007, 2008. And there was one in the 80s, and there was the last one before that, I think, was in the 60s, like 1960. And each time before now, what the world didn't have was social media. So the narrative around the strikes was whatever the studios wanted it to be, because the big media companies own the big media trades, and they're able to like basically skew every story to be like, oh yeah, your show is canceled because the writers or actors are on strike.
Mm,
Which is when the actual story is the actors are on strike because they're not getting paid. Like
mm,
they're being abused in their workplace effectively. But now we have social media, so every time that the studios try something like these strong arm tactics that they've tried in the past, it just comes out on social media and it turns the narrative against them a little bit. And I think that is
mm,
maybe why the strike will go for longer, because not only the other dumb thing is that like they sort of count on people at different levels not really necessarily communicating about their compensation or about their deals or about the
mm,
conditions on their sets. But now they've been on strike together, walking lines together for over 100 days, sharing
mm,
stories, and it's just increasing everything about the climate right now. Whether we're just talking about our current stage of capitalism or just the conditions in Hollywood that they've created for themselves, like, is just increasing the solidarity of the striking workers, which is, I think, wonderful. And
mm,
and the other thing is that I don't know what the studios are expecting here, because on the one hand, they're treating it like they hold all the cards, but when the writers went on strike in 1960, the result of that was they got health insurance and they got residuals, which they had not been getting before that point. They were finally got fed up and they were like, no, you need to pay us for the ongoing profiteering from our work. And I honestly don't, off the top of my head, remember exactly what they went on strike for in 2008. I'm pretty sure it was residuals to do with home video at that time, because DVDs were exploding. Like VHS was, residuals from VHS was part of the cause of the '81 writers' strike, and residuals from DVDs and Blu-rays. Because every time there's a new format, a new medium, the studios go, well, that's not covered by the deal, so we're not going to pay for it. We're not going to pay you for it. And then the writers go on strike and they win. Every time they have won. So I don't exactly know what the studios think they're going to get here. You know, they didn't pay residuals on VHS, and then the writers went on strike, and then they had to pay. And then they didn't pay residuals on DVDs and Blu-rays, and then the writers went on strike, and then they had to pay. And now they aren't paying residuals on streaming, and the writers are on strike, and they're gonna have to pay. Like, they're just not going to be able to create the content if they don't pay, right? So, the whole thing is very frustrating. I think I said this last week, but the quote, I think it was Matt Zoller's site said on Twitter the other day, that the one that really hammers it home for me is that, like, you know, in the past, every studio head wanted to be Jack Warner, and today every studio head just wants to be a billionaire.
Mm.
And
I think it puts into focus all the bullshit that comes out as well about anything that Disney say or Netflix says about art being important to them, or like preservation of art, or the quality is important to them. This is absolutely crystal clear confirmation that it's complete just marketing. They don't believe it at all. And what's really interesting is like a company like A24, who are getting things made because they agree to everything. They're like, yeah, sure, we agree to all of your demands, so please carry on making A24 stuff. That tells you exactly how they treat their stuff as well, and makes me want to give my money to A24 way more than these other big companies. But I can draw the line back. Like, I'm 46, and when I was 16, in England you have to choose your subjects, and actually it was at 14, so this is like 32 years ago. And arts education has been reduced and diminished for decades, and I can draw the line now as someone who, when I made my choices, the only arts education thing was drama, and it was at the NE. You could either do drama or geography in the spare time when all the other important things are going on. And then I went into teaching it, and then the attitude towards arts education in schools, as well as parents, but definitely in schools, is it is a spare subject that has no use. And then you see the difference it makes on the students who actually come through your doors, especially if they're learning the language at the same time. Night and day difference. Um, and then we get like 30 something years later, I can draw a line straight through the way society and businesses are, who look at creatives and look at art as just being this fun thing that isn't really useful or profitable. And it just drives me crazy. Always has. So that's
what's frustrating too. So obviously, the WGA and SAG-AFTRA strikes are getting lots of attention, and rightly so. Did you know that ACTRA is locked out of making commercials here in Canada?
No.
So ACTRA is the Canadian union for actors, the Alliance of Canadian Cinema, Television, and Radio Artists. And one of the big contracts, but collective bargaining agreements they have is with a group called the NCA and also the ICA. Those are the national and international commercial agreements. So the ICA represents companies that want to make advertising here in Canada. So if you see an ad that is for a Canadian product or service, and it's shot with Canadians, whatever, that all comes through a collective bargaining agreement called the ICA, the NCA. When that bargaining agreement came up for review, which was over a year ago now, just to put this in perspective, like more than 12 months ago, as I understand it, they proposed something like a 60% cut to pay rates, the elimination of retirement contributions, and the end of like multi-employer. They have a multi-employer benefit plan because the ICA like represents like 15 advertising agencies here in Canada, and they said we want to stop doing that. And when ACTRA said no, we're not going to let you cut all of our pay and benefits, the ICA locked them out. They have been locked out of making ads, commercial work in Canada for over a year. Every commercial that's been filmed in Canada has been non-union. And I only found this out as a Canadian person because an American actor who mostly does non-union work that I follow on TikTok talked about it. She went to Toronto to film an ad and realized, holy shit, I'm being a scab right now. And she had no idea until she'd done it. So it's happening all over. It's big labor summer. It's not like an open strike. Like, they're not on strike. They are being locked out of work, which is a different thing. But it's similarly terrible. Because, like, how are you supposed to... I mean, most actors make their work in this kind of work, right? Like, the vast majority of actors are working class, and lots of people make their bones, like, making ads and smaller projects, and these are the kinds of things they're just not able to work on right now. And it's very, very, very frustrating. Because the studios, and in this case the advertising agencies, don't want to pay. It's and they're just actively employing scabs to do it. It's very frustrating.
Anyway, should we move on? Otherwise, we're just going to talk about this, because as you can probably tell, we're both quite upset about this whole thing. We know a lot of people in the industry, and it's shit.
I mean, if the last several weeks or months worth of podcast episodes where we openly rant about it haven't hammered that home, that I don't know what will. Anyway, yeah, we should move on. So let's move on to talking about the single thing we're talking about this week, which is the first 2 episodes of Star Wars Ahsoka, made by the Evil Empire. I mean, Disney. And they pick up the story of Ahsoka Tano, who... So for those of you who don't know, I'm sure you are at least aware that there was an animated series called The Clone Wars, and then a follow-up series called Rebels. Clone Wars was a very... it was an anthology series, so every 2... It'd be stories told over 2 or 3 episodes, with multiple sort of groups of characters throughout the Clone Wars. And one of those characters was Ahsoka Tano. And she is, at the beginning of that series, she is a teenager, and she is Anakin Skywalker's Padawan learner, his apprentice. And she grows, and eventually at the end of the Clone Wars show, she eventually leaves the Jedi Order, in disgust over a controversy that I'm not going to go into, but it's actually a super interesting storyline. And eventually, so Rebels takes place in the years leading up to original Star Wars. So not the Clone Wars, but the Empire is in full force. And at one point we see, in the background, we see Luke Skywalker when he's like 10. So it's like 5 to 10 years pre-Star Wars. And in that series, it basically chronicles the formation of the Rebel Alliance. And it's revealed at certain points that Ahsoka Tano is a sort of coordinator. She's helping the various cells of resistance communicate and coordinate. And it's also great. She's a young woman at this point. She's still using her lightsaber. She's still with the Force, but she's not a Jedi anymore. It's very, very interesting. And so Ahsoka takes place after the original trilogy, and probably concurrently with the more recent series. Like, I think it's basically concurrent with the 3rd season of The Mandalorian. So that's about 9, 10, 11 years after the Battle of Yavin, for those of you who care about that kind of thing. And at the end of Rebels, there was a major character called Ezra, who was like the first new Jedi who disappeared. And this show picks up Ahsoka on the trail of the major antagonist of that show, Grand Admiral Thrawn. And I don't know how much more of the story I want to tell you at this point, because I think it's really interesting and goes to a lot of interesting places. But I think the key thing to remember here, although I don't think you need to watch Rebels, this is very much a sequel to Rebels. Like, it's basically live action Rebels season 5, and I'm all in. I thought Rebels was among the best Star Wars that's been made. Full stop. Like, not even like recently made, but just Star Wars that has been made. And this being a live action sequel to that, I think is great. We have at least so far we have at least 2 major characters from that show. Hera Syndulla, who is the captain of the team in Rebels, and also Sabine Wren, who's a young Mandalorian who's on that team, are major characters in Ahsoka, and it's just really great to see them in live action. The show is ridiculously well cast. We already knew that Rosario Dawson was going to be playing Ahsoka, but now we have Mary Elizabeth Winstead playing Hera, and we have Natasha Liu Brodizzo playing Sabine. Um, and they're pretty, I would say, universally great. Like as someone who is very invested in Rebels, I was very worried that these new performers would not be able to like take over the characters in a way that I might find satisfying. But let me just assuage that fear right now. They are both great. Mary Elizabeth Winstead, in particular, um, is great as Hera, and I don't like. There's so much I want to say but it's all spoilery, and I don't want to say it. So, at the moment, I'm just gonna take a beat and reassess my thoughts while Simon tells you what he thinks of the show.
So I think everything you say, I agree with. It's really interesting to me that we've talked a lot about what doesn't work with the Mandalorian, and Filoni's been a major part of the Mandalorian with Jon Favreau and Robert Rodriguez, and it's been so interesting to me because Filoni really did such a great job with Rebels, and I was quite surprised that Mandalorian didn't have the same kind of lightness and the same kind of tone, and seeing him back by himself without Filoni and Rodriguez's influence kind of makes me think that's the best place for him to be, because um, I went into this with very low expectations. It's fair to say that Star Wars has been letting me down more than not. Andor was an outlier, and what's interesting, and I think that Andor's influence and reaction, critical and commercial reaction, has really been a huge influence um, on even things like Secret Invasion, but definitely on this show as well. But what it really feels like, and you were absolutely right, is that it feels like a Rebels Part Two, and it's. I didn't think it would be able to do it, to be honest, because that jump from animated to live action has so many dangerous elements that you could get wrong, not least the casting, but just the tone and trying to find that balance of what the populist Star Wars viewer who wants hints and cameos and answers and links, and then you've got a wider audience who just wants a good story. And I think sometimes they forget that latter part a bit. And even just the first two episodes, I'm so impressed with the tone of it and how good it looks as well, and also that it doesn't feel particularly rushed. One of my big criticisms with Star Wars shows is that the characters never really given much time for any kind of development, because there's always this rush to get them to the next situation, the next reveal, the next thing. And there were loads of moments, particularly in episode one, but in episode two as well, where there are long held moments of silence while a character kind of thinks about something. And there's one character, I say Sabine, at one point has to try and do a thing, and instead of her just working out how to do it instantly, it really takes its time to show us how she kind of works out the kinks in this puzzle. And the whole thing kind of feels like that. Like, it doesn't feel rushed, and it actually feels like a much more mature or reasoned approach to these characters. So then when there is action, it's a nice contrast. You don't feel like you're always like hurtling forward to the next battle, the next fight, or the next reveal. I mean, there's still some really clunky dialogue. I don't think Star Wars. I think Star Wars suffers from a dialogue delivery issue in everything but Andor when it comes to the TV shows. In that there's everyone has a perfect soundbite. Every conversation goes back and forth uninterrupted. Everyone has the perfect edited moment of comprehension before saying their perfect soundbite. And I think that's still present here as well, particularly in episode one. But what's great about Ahsoka is that that's balanced out by absolutely phenomenal casting. And the interaction between the cast is great. I love Mary Elizabeth Winstead. I've been a major cheerleader for her for a long time, but even I am like surprised at how well she's capturing Hera. Hera's one of probably my favorite character from the Rebel show, and I just think she's phenomenal. I didn't think it was possible to get that kind of mix of what Hera is, and she's just fantastic. But also, Rosario Dawson's fantastic, of course, and Natasha Louis, but I can't say her last name. Can't remember her
Bordizzo.
last name. Bordizzo is, again, Sabine is a tricky thing to get right, and I think she's brilliant in this as Sabine. And there's one thing I really like as well, and then I'll let you talk again. But uh, there is a gap between End of Rebels and this. I'm not sure 10 years feels too long, but there's definitely a sizable gap because um, Filoni's taken some pretty big swings that I was not expecting. In that he's inserted major story elements that we didn't see between the end of Rebels, where they left together and were buddy buddy, and the beginning of Ahsoka, where Sabine and Ahsoka are not talking. And there's no, if I remember rightly, and you may want to correct me on this, there's no indication in Rebels that Sabine is force sensitive at all. And so the idea that Ahsoka tried to train her and essentially failed, which of course echoes back to Luke and echoes back to Qui-Gon even, and of course Anakin is such the ghost of Anakin is present for Ahsoka at all times as well, which I really like. And I thought that was a really big swing that could have really gone wrong, and I think it's great. It's a really interesting story beat. There's a major lightsaber battle that kind of shows us that Sabine maybe isn't the kind of person to be that Jedi. And when she kind of reclaims her other Mandalorian identity with her blasters, it feels more fitting. I just think it's really successful, the first two episodes, and there's a really great fight. There's a lightsaber scene in the first episode which is not good. I mean, people need to stop spinning 360 degrees. Unfortunately that single sword fighting class that I did at the sword place you used to go to has opened my eyes to people would not spin 360 degrees when sword fighting because the other person would just go doink. Like
Yeah,
people need to stop
the
spinning
the
in the
serious
lightsaber
problem
battles.
the serious problem with knowing anything about how to fight with a sword is that every sword fight on screen becomes stab him now, stab him now, just do it now.
But there is a second lightsaber battle in a ship dock with Ahsoka and two other people that is exceptional, and it's sort of there's two different things happening at the same time, and it's just shot really really well. Chopper remains the best droid, but the other droid is great as well. But not unfortunately, but I haven't seen. I know you've talked a lot about. Um, Ray Stevenson before. I haven't seen him in anything, and he's in this really interesting like fallen. It's not really a spoiler. He's a was Jedi who has now got almost like a mercenary with his own Padawan. Super interesting character who is not like being played as evil, but he's definitely not someone you want to mess with. Ray Stevenson is phenomenal in the first two episodes, and it's heartbreaking that he died so young, really.
So, just to illuminate the timeline just a little bit, so Star Wars Rebels takes place. So the Battle of Yavin, which is the big battle in Star Wars, uh, which is the first movie. It's just called Star Wars. I will die on this hill. Um,
Yes.
so it takes place between five years before the Battle of Yavin, all the way up to just about the Battle of Yavin. Like one of the last things that happens in Rebels is they are forced to move their base to Yavin 4. And so I think it ends about a year before the Battle of Yavin. So the end of Return of the Jedi is about 4 years later, so 4 years after Battle of Yavin, because this is the timeline that we use, the way we describe time in Star Wars. And the Mandalorian starts 5 years after that, so 9 years after Battle of Yavin. And this takes place concurrently with season 3 of The Mandalorian, so it's fairly safe to say that this is going to be 10 to 11 years after Star Wars, or
Is that low?
about 6 years after the end of Return of the Jedi, or about 10 years since we last. So 10 years since the last major thing that happened in Rebels, but the last shot of Rebels is actually basically recreated in the show. The last shot of Rebels is Ahsoka coming to see Sabine to recruit her to go find Ezra, or to go on some quest. We don't actually know what it is at that point. We assume that it's to go find Ezra. And in fact, if you go back and watch that episode, it is beat for beat like recreated in this, with in the same place, with the same ships flying overhead, everything, which is kind of great. So yeah, it is about 10 years later, and you're not wrong. There's a lot of really interesting big swing choices that I really worry they're going to try and make like a prequel series to explain, which I really don't think that they need to. It's going to be far more interesting for us to find out Ahsoka and Sabine's history just from this show.
Definitely.
And the show also makes it clear that although Sabine was taken on as an apprentice, she's actually, it's not just that she was never indicated to being force sensitive, she's just not that force sensitive. So I think it's a really interesting take, because everyone, lots of people talk about, Jedi Knights need to hit the Force, and they need to be strong with the lightsaber. And I'm going to make a big swing comparison here, but one of the things I've always liked about The Empire Strikes Back, and about Yoda in particular, and Yoda as he appears in The Empire Strikes Back, and then again in The Last Jedi, is that it's really made clear that there are more important things to being a Jedi than just being good with the lightsaber, or just being able to push stuff around with the Force. It's about, connection and understanding, and the way you interact with the world around you, and a strict moral code. And I feel like the prequel series, one of the biggest disservices they did to the originals was having Yoda pick up a lightsaber and fight. Because it sort of undermines that idea that he's an important Jedi, not because he's good with a lightsaber, but because he has a strict moral code. He's strongly connected to the Force. He understands right from wrong, and just how the world around him works, and how to interact with that world. And I feel like the show is saying that they chose Sabine not because she's good with the Force, but because of that other thing, because of the things that are more important. She has a strict moral code. She has clearly defined ideas of what's right and what's wrong, and how to achieve those things. And because she's really intuitive when it comes to like puzzles and mysteries and things that need to be worked out and solved. And I find that super interesting, and I hope they don't give her some moment of revelation that makes her a strong lightsaber fighter, because you're not wrong. That first lightsaber fight in the first episode is really weak, but I like that it's weak because it's between a Padawan we've never seen before and another Padawan who hasn't been training for years, who was never that good at it to begin with. And I think that excuses it a little bit. And I think that, like, in that way, it's thematically very on point, even if it is a bit like telegraphed. I think it's telegraphed on purpose this time, or it feels like it could be, at least. So yeah, I think there's a lot of really interesting. What I'm trying to say is there's a lot of really interesting choices going on here, and I think that this show's great strength is that it is inheriting almost everything it is from Rebels and a little bit from Clone Wars, which, because it's not concerned with being Star Wars, if that makes sense. Like one of the biggest problems with The Mandalorian, I think from both of our point of view, is that it is constantly, I mean, if he wasn't wearing a helmet, he'd be looking at the screen and winking, just to be like, you basically feel that he's doing it anyway every time they're like dropping a reference, or the fact that his rifle is the rifle from Star Wars Holiday Special. They're constantly like winking at the camera, being like, look at how Star Warsy our Star Wars show is. And where Andor and this are succeeding, at least so far in this case, and where Rebels really succeeded, is that they felt like a good, interesting story set that happens to be set in the Star Wars universe, as opposed to being more Star Wars. You know, like it's a somewhat subtle distinction because the show still has people who use lightsabers, but it's not overly concerned with being so tied to existing lore. It's creating new lore, new interesting characters and planets and worlds adjacent to the ones we already know, not on the ones we already know. And that makes a huge difference for me personally. And I think
Yeah.
that Filoni, especially when he's on his own, and I think you're right, the one key difference here is that Filoni wrote all of this show, and Jon Favreau has written the bulk of The Mandalorian. And I think that there's lots of people that love The Mandalorian, and I'm very happy for them, but I think that Filoni's understanding of the universe is deeper. And I think, at least in this case, when he has a story to tell, I think it is better executed, um, as evidenced by Rebels, and the beginning of this, because the beginning of this is great. It really does recapture the feeling of Rebels. Again, everyone is. I think I'm probably repeating myself, but everyone who's in it so far is great. Um, you're right that Mary Elizabeth Winstead is fantastic as Hera. Like, really, really captures Hera, especially when it comes to. And what really hammers it home is there's a couple of moments in episode 2 when we also get to see Chopper, who is the droid from Rebels again. And Chopper is, just for the record, the best droid. Like, that's another hill I will die on. And and her interaction with Chopper is going to feel really, really organic and natural. I think even to people who've never watched Rebels, but if you've watched Rebels, you're like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
these are those characters again. These are
Yeah,
those characters
totally.
again.
Yeah.
You know, and I feel like the choice to bring in Ray Stevenson, and I'm sure you've seen him in stuff before, but he is so good. He's done so much work over the years, but he is so good in this. And I've been a fan of his since, I think the first thing I really saw him in would have been HBO's Rome, which was like 2006, something like that, 2005. Probably 2003, actually, because anyway, probably early zeros anyway. And I've always been a fan. And he is so good as, basically, he's not a Sith, but he's not a Jedi either. And there's a number of moments in this where he's delivered lines that make it clear that he's very much in this gray area between those two things. And they're all, especially one you'll watch for it right at the end of episode 2, but it's so perfectly delivered the way he seems to view the world as this. Again, he's not fallen so far that he's exactly a Sith, but he's almost like a bad Jedi, if that makes sense. I don't really know how to explain it. He's disappeared to the Outer Rim. He's come back as this mercenary character who uses the Force, who has a moral code. He seems to be very dedicated to completing the tasks he takes on, but he's not a good guy anymore, though. He will take the tasks that pay, is my impression.
Yeah, his mercenary ex-Jedi
he,
is really fascinating, like, position for a character.
Yeah, basically that's it's the most fascinating choice, and the fact that and we haven't really at this point seen enough of his Padawan, his apprentice, to really get a sense for how she fits into it. But it's going to be very interesting to see where her moral compass lands compared to his and compared to someone like Ahsoka's. And I honestly can't wait to see more of this. There's other things I really want to talk about that are all spoilers, so I might talk with you about them after. But just also, I will say there's one thing I do want to ask. So it's made clear from like scene 2 of this show that the thing they're all after is a map, and the map is to where Grand Admiral Thrawn has been exiled to or is hiding, whichever one of those it turns out to be. And here's my question, Simon. So I've watched all the Star Wars. I feel like I've paid attention to the Star Wars, but I feel like you might have a deeper connection to it than I do. So here's my question:
Okay.
Why is it always a fucking map?
because Star Wars has always been the hero's journey, and one stage of the hero's journey is the adventure into the unknown. And how are you going to get there without a map? Like, that is it. it has always been the archetypal hero's journey, and every hero needs a map to where the danger is. After they refuse the call and then accept the call, they have to find their way to the Forbidden Land, and that's with the map.
I just feel like, and maybe this is a Disney Star Wars thing, because it's definitely been more prevalent since The Force Awakens. But in The Force Awakens, they're after a map, and in the Rise of Skywalker, they are after a map. And in
Which makes no sense. That map makes zero sense, but let's not even get into that.
let's not even talk about that. But then there's several maps they need in Clone Wars. There's I think there's a map at some point in The Mandalorian, and it's just always a map. Why is it always a map? It could be anything else.
Because this is a Greek story, my friend.
Anyway,
This
I will say this, at least at this point, and not to spoil it, but if you've watched the trailer, you've seen at least a glimpse of it. When they finally get the map unlocked and you get to see it, it looks incredible.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the production, I will say the production design of the show is legitimately incredible. And manages,
looks so much cleaner than Obi-Wan does.
It looks cleaner. It's also, I mean, I get the intent. It's they really do have to try and mimic the look of Rebels, which was always going to be cleaner than something live action. But they managed to recreate Lothal, which is like the main planet from Rebels. They managed to recreate it so perfectly.
Yeah.
But then also just the way the ships look and move, some of the new and interesting details in the costumes and the locations. And then, like I say, this map location at the end of episode 2 is legitimately one of the most beautiful things I've seen them do in ages.
Yeah. And on that note, as this is a Greek hero's journey, it always has been, Rebels kind of introduces a very heavy sort of mythical element in its big bad, the person that the not Siths are actually ultimately working for, is referred to as a witch, a night sister from Rebels, and it occurred to me that kind of mystical, like there's always been the Force, but there's something about having a witch in Star Wars that just makes sense to me. That an extra kind of a different magic than the Force, like a competing magic that isn't the bad side of the Force, but something else. I really liked the Night Sisters in Rebels, so I really like how the baddie is not just like when Thrawn turns up, we know he's going to be like a Peter Cushing baddie, like British accented Empire bro. And we know what he's going to be like when he turns up. So I really like how at this point the big bad is a witch in Star Wars. That really works for me.
He actually doesn't have a British accent.
Oh, doesn't he?
No, he's played by
I've never heard him talk.
He's he's played by Lars Mikkelsen, Mads Mikkelsen's brother. So he has like a Northern European accent.
Oh, okay, well, that counts. We'll take that.
It's and I don't know if you've never watched. You must have heard him talk because Lars Mikkelsen played Thrawn in the animated show, so you've definitely heard him talk.
And which animated show?
Rebels.
Well, my memory is not what it used to be.
Yeah.
I mean, Danish, British, it's the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely... yeah, anyway. We haven't seen him yet in the episodes we've seen, but Lars Mikkelsen is reprising his role. As is actually, we haven't talked about, but David Tennant is reprising his role from Clone Wars as the droid Hu Yang. I think that obviously Mads Mikkelsen is super famous and he's super talented, and all of that is definitely warranted. I think that Lars Mikkelsen is actually a very underrated performer and is super good at playing a bad guy. And he was so good in the voice role as Thrawn. I can't wait to see what he does in a live action performance. And I'm very excited to see that. And I think this really boils down to, maybe for both of us, but I think just going back to what I was saying about the show being not being beholden to being more Star Wars, is that I think the great strength here is just that it is more Rebels. Like it's drawing from the lore that Filoni has created, not from the universe at large, right? It's continuing the stories that Filoni has started. So he's not trying to like work other people's stuff into his stuff. He's just working with what he's already made himself. And
I really hope that. Is it 6 episodes? Is it limited series? Do you know how many
It's a
in total?
limited series, and it's actually 8 episodes.
Right.
So the first two are on the 22nd, which is, if you're listening to this on time, it's today. And it continues through to there's 2 episodes, and then there's one a week until the 3rd of October.
Right.
And
I'm
it's the first Star Wars in a while that I've been excited to follow.
Yeah, exactly. I'm actually looking forward to the other episodes, and I was not ready for that at all. Um, so I'm really pleasantly surprised. I really hope it doesn't drop the ball now. Like, it's established itself really well with these first 2 episodes, and I hope the remaining 6 are of the same quality and are similarly resistant to try and call back to the wider universe,
Yeah,
because it does absolutely have what Rebels had, which was new, interesting characters existing in this universe, and it feels like that, and
yeah.
I'm really happy about that.
There are one or two things that make me a little worried, and maybe I'll talk to you about those when we're off the air.
Okay, yeah,
Um, but I'm super excited to see where it goes,
hmm,
and I mean that's really all you need to know, right? Like
yeah,
I think the
yeah,
first 2 episodes are super strong. I can't wait to see more, and I hope that it, as with you, I hope that it doesn't drop the ball.
hmm, excellent.
So, do you want to give it a star rating? Should we do that? I mean,
No,
it's hard to judge a
no,
show based on 2 episodes, but I would say the
yeah,
first two that I've seen are both very strong, and I hope that it continues.
yeah, stronger than expected by a long margin. Uh, it's just really well made. I
It
hope the
does.
dialogue gets a bit more natural. That would be nice. But
Again, I think the Star Wars dialogue problem is deeper seated and longer served than you're implying. I think it's been that
but
way since the start.
yeah, it has. You're not wrong. But and it's got worse since the original trilogy. But the Andor like perfectly demonstrated how to still be meaningful and not have that delivery style and not have that line. Um, the
That's
line
true.
drops not
I would
drop the
argue
sound
that
line.
the difference with Andor though is that although this show and Rebels are not trying to just be more Star Wars in the same way that The Mandalorian is, they are still within the same sort of adventure genre. And Andor is something totally different. And I feel like as long as we're in this same sort of general genre and tone that Ahsoka is now existing in, I think we're going to continue to get the same
I
kind
don't
of
know.
dialogue.
I see what you're saying, but that one scene where Ahsoka and Sabine meet for the first time and sit down and talk over the table, and the bitterness slowly comes out. That really, really needed an edit, and it needed a redirect, because they didn't sound like two people talking to each other. It was really kind of stilted. But so little things like that. But for the larger sense, I do know what you're saying about the adventure approach, but I would like a bit more natural, a bit more sensitivity to what makes a natural conversation, I think. But that's just me.
I mean, I don't disagree. I'm just saying that like I feel like that might feel out of place in this universe.
I don't know. I don't agree with that. I think this show's done a really good job of establishing the new relationship between Ahsoka and Sabine. Like, I've been so surprised with how what it's done with that relationship, and B, how well it's establishing it. And it's actually quite well written, which I wasn't expecting either. In fact, it's mostly really well written. And so I just that final, like, I just wish that final little piece was there. But it's a minor thing. It's a very satisfying show to watch. It's really, really good. So
Yeah,
I'm surprised, genuinely surprised.
I will say that I do think I was sort of worried about it, but I do think, as it turns out, that Dave Filoni is a better writer than John Favreau. I would say.
Yeah, certainly when it comes to Star Wars, and a better director than Robert Rodriguez, certainly. And the first 2 episodes alone have made me feel a lot happier that Filoni is making the one of the big next Star Wars movies is his. So
Yeah. Although I would, to be
I'm
fair, I
looking forward
think
to that.
I think Dave Filoni, I think he's a decent director, and especially having learned a lot from Rian Johnson, and I'm sure from Jon Favreau as well. But I would argue that the second episode is better directed than the first, and it was directed by somebody else.
That's absolutely correct. There's a woman's name I didn't recognize, actually.
She, Steph Green, she's also directing episode 3, and she is mostly... She's worked in TV for a while. She directed episodes of Watchmen, Luke Cage. I think she worked on... I think she did an episode of Book of Boba Fett, which is not a feather in her cap as far as I'm concerned. But Watchmen is. Preacher probably is. I haven't actually watched Preacher, but I know lots of people love Billions and The Americans. She's directed episodes of. So she's been around. We're also getting an episode later on directed by Peter Ramsey, who's probably... He directed an episode of Mandalorian last season, but he's probably most famous for being a co-director of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
Yeah.
We're not getting a Bryce Dallas Howard episode in this season. But maybe we don't need that as long as it stays as strong as it is.
Yeah.
So...
She is great, though. She's a brilliant director, too, for Star Wars.
Yeah.
But episode 2 was brilliantly directed. It's true.
Yeah. And not that the first one was bad. Just the second one is better.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Good.
Yeah.
So watch it. Let us know what you think. And I'm sure we'll be talking about the episodes, at least passively, as they release over the next 6 weeks or so.
Yeah, and I'm sure that we'll have a wrap-up episode when it's over, like we did with Andor, too.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Any hoodles. Let's stop there before we get into spoiler territory, which we're not allowed to get into. So if you're listening to this, thank you so much. We appreciate that you're here, whether you're new or old or whatever. We're just happy that you're here listening to us. Yeah. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can do that. The easiest way to do it, and if you look in the show notes, you'll find links to my homepage, which is stretched.ca, and Simon's homepage, which is temporarypen.com, and of course our homepage, which is awesomefriday.ca. You'll find all of our socials and contact forms on those places. There's too many socials to list at this point, so just hit up our websites and do the thing. If you've liked what you heard, whatever podcasting platform you're listening on, we would greatly appreciate if you would give us a 5-star review or hit the subscribe button or both, and tell your friends. But all those things help get us into the charts and in front of more earballs, and we greatly appreciate them. And last but not least, if you would like to support us a little more directly, we do have a Patreon. Every week we do a bonus round conversation. This week's was about unintentional shared universes and movies that are better in shitty quality, if you can believe that. And I thought it was a really interesting conversation. And you can find that at patreon.com/MCSimpson. And the lowest tier to get in is only $2 Canadian a month, which is like 88 cents Canadian, 88 cents American. So, do with that information what you will. Less than the price of a cup of coffee, folks, and also less than supporting a child in Africa. So you can support 2 middle-aged men in Canada instead. With that, I think we're going to wrap up. The last thing we need to talk about is that we record this here in Vancouver on the unceded and ancestral lands of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations. One last time, thank you so much for listening and for joining us on this awesome Friday.
Thanks, bye.